This is the animated review of the book Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Point 1. Early Life as a Slave. Booker T. Washington was born in 1858 or 1859. The actual date of his birth is unclear because during slavery, the slaves' date of birth were withheld. But as Mr. Washington says in his book, I must have been born somewhere at some time. He grew up knowing almost nothing of his ancestry. He knew very little of his mother and even less of his father, although it was said that he was a white man from a nearby plantation. He found no fault with him, as he was another victim of the institution of slavery. He had no schooling whatsoever as a slave. The only knowledge he received was from the other slaves. The early years of his life was spent in a little log cabin, much like the other slaves. And not one period of his life was dedicated to play. Almost every day of his life was dedicated to some type of labor. The slaves were informed of things going on by the black postal workers when they delivered the mail once or twice weekly. Word spread quickly about Lincoln being president, and they were kept up to date as to every defeat of the Confederate armies. Finally, the war closed and freedom came. He was still but a child. Point 2. Struggle for an education. I remember having this intense longing to learn to read if I accomplished nothing else in life, he stated. The young Booker T. Washington heard of a school established by the members of his race that provided opportunities for poor but worthy students, where they could work out all or part of the cost of board, at the same time learn some trade industry. He felt this was the greatest place on earth or heaven. It was called the Hampton Institute. He made his way from Malden to Hampton, 500 miles away, by walking, begging rides in wagons and cars with virtually no money whatsoever. I reached the conclusion, he states, that the Negro boy's connection with an unpopular race is an advantage because the Negro boy must work harder to secure his recognition. Finally, he reached the grounds of Hampton Institute. He was then tasked with cleanup duties. Never did he receive an order with such delight. He worked 10 hours during the day and received 2 hours of schooling at night. There he met many types of people. He learned agriculture, how to teach, and public speaking. Point 3. Building Tuskegee. Now working as a teacher at the Hampton Institute, the young Booker T. Washington receives a call offering him the opportunity to take over a small school called Tuskegee. He accepted, and Tuskegee opened its doors on July 4th, 1881. Teaching in a stable in a hen house is what it was in the beginning. When the doors opened, he was the only teacher, but the numbers increased every week. From the very beginning, he was determined to have the students do their own agricultural work, but also have them erect their own buildings. I had always sympathized with the children of Israel in their task of making bricks without straw, but ours was a task of making bricks without money or experience. The individual who can do something that the world wants done, in the end, will make his way regardless of his race, he says. During the early years, from the first day, Booker T. Washington sought to impress upon the students that Tuskegee was not his institution, but it was their institution. Point 4. Fundraising and public speaking. While reaching the end of his funds, Booker T. was once again called upon by the general to go on a little speaking tour up north, and Tuskegee will receive all the funds for the trip. After the introduction by General Armstrong, Booker T. Washington began going up north alone to speak and secure funds. Although I've had the privilege to raise money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, for Tuskegee, I have always avoided what would be called begging, he states. Merely making people aware of Tuskegee and the fact regarding the work we do has been more than effective. I think that the presentation of the facts on a dignified plane is all the begging most rich people care for. Enclosed is a check for $10,000 to be used to further your work. I had placed this sum in my will, but it seemed wiser to give it to you while I still live, was one letter he recalled receiving. Then a $50,000 sum from Mr. and Mrs. Huntington, and then a $20,000 sum from Mr. Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest men in the world at that time. Money was coming in regularly. He was often asked how he began the practice of public speaking. He would answer, "I never planned on giving any large part of my life to public speaking. I always had the ambition of doing things and not merely speaking about doing things," he says. 2,000 miles for a 5-minute speech. That's what it amounted to. When he gave what is called the Atlanta Compromise Address. He spoke as the representative of the Negro race. It was very well received and gave him the most of the recognition he receives today as a speaker. Booker T. Washington died on November 14th, 1915. This is the animated review of the book Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington.